Hello and welcome to the NEASC Virtual Global Forum, Challenges and Successes in Implementing Online Learning. We're so glad you've joined us as we explore this important topic with NEASC educators across the world. We've had a tremendous response to this forum with over 400 attendees from over 25 countries around the world. My name is George Edwards, and I'm the director of the Public School Commission at the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Working with me today is my colleague, Allison Geary. Allison is the deputy director of the Public Schools Commission. This forum is the first in a planned series of forums. Each forum will be focused on a specific topic. We've asked for questions in advance so we can stay focused on our topic. We received many more questions than we will be able to address today. We plan to use the additional questions for future forums. Our forums are designed to use the global reach of the New England Association of Schools and Colleges and bring together educators from independent schools, international schools, and public schools. We have created the hashtag NEASC Forum, and we encourage you to use it when sharing thoughts from today's discussion on social media. And now a few words about NEASC and our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We understand the unprecedented gravity of the situation and the added responsibilities and stress facing schools and centers with our educators in these times. We want to thank all of you for the incredible work you're doing to continue the learning for your students. Many of you are also continuing with vital services like providing meals. Although accreditation visits for the spring of 2020 have been postponed, your school's accreditation status is not at risk as a result of these postponements. We are constantly monitoring the situation in each state and country where our schools and centers are located. We are in ongoing communication with our schools and centers and working together to design solutions that will work for you moving forward. We are planning a future webinar that will dive more deeply into NEASC's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now I'd like to turn to today's forum. First, let me introduce our panelists. Scott Prescott is the Director of Instruction for the Virtual Learning Academy Charter School, an online public charter school located in New Hampshire. Scott is the former principal of Sauhegan High School in Amherst, New Hampshire, and has been an active visit leader for the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Also with us today is Jason Cummings. Jason is the Director of School Programs for the Global Online Academy. Formerly, he was the Modern Languages Department Head at Beaver Country Day School and the Director of Global Studies at Greens Farms Academy. A little bit about our webinar format today. The NEASC Virtual Global Forum is a webinar and not a Zoom meeting. Because of the large number of participants, attendees are view-only participants. Attendees can interact with the host and the panelists through the question and answer function in the webinar, and the panelists and each other can use the chat features. We ask that you limit the use of the question and answer function for questions related to the forum topic. Although we do not anticipate being able to share the questions today, we do intend to use them to help us determine topics for future forums. If you have general comments, want to offer suggestions, or just want to say hi, we ask that you use the chat feature. You can select those who see your comments using the drop-down menu in chat before you post your message. Allison will bring both question and answer feature and the chat feature during our Zoom today. We will start by giving each of our panelists a few minutes to talk about the challenges and successes that they've had or seen with virtual learning, and then turn to the most frequently asked questions you submitted during the registration process. So let's get started, and I'm going to ask Jason to start first. Jason?
Happy to start. It says here the host is disabled screen sharing, so if somebody could just let me share my screen, that would be great.
Let me work on that for you.
Yep. So as George was saying, my name is Jason Cummings. I'm the Director of Student Programs with Global Online Academy. When we get my slides here in just a minute, I'll tell you more about GOA, but essentially we're a not-for-profit consortium set up 10 years ago with 5 member schools 10 years ago to explore what online learning might look like in the independent school space. And now 10 years later, we're 95 schools around the US and around the world. About 40% of our member schools are international schools. So I'm super excited to see lots of different international school folks here this morning. And as somebody's putting in the comments right here, we've been doing over the past number of weeks quite a lot of training for teachers who are, like perhaps many of you, finding themselves in this position of making a transition to online learning that you may not have been fully expecting to make. Let me see if I can get those slides now.
Yeah, Jason, we're having a little bit of a difficulty with that. We're working on it behind the scenes here.
Not a problem. So our mission as an organization is to help schools reimagine teaching and learning for a future networked society. And so in a lot of ways, we've all been thrust into the future, whether we like it or not. And that's one thing I think we should talk about here this morning. We have 3 sort of arms of our organization, one that's dedicated to professional learning and running online courses for teachers, which has been growing pretty fast in the last month. One that's designed for doing custom builds and designs of online courses and online learning experiences, whether it's faculty trainings or programs for associations. And then the other is the part I oversee, which is our work for students. We run semester and year-long programs, as well as some mini course options for upper school students and middle school students, and then open to all students, whether they're at member schools or not, are our summer courses. Most of our courses tend to be a supplemental kind of thing. Introduction to investments is very popular, medical problem solving, very popular, introduction to psychology, et cetera, et cetera. So mostly lying outside the core of what schools do, and most of our students, as Scott and I were just discussing, are students who are taking 4 or 5 courses at their school and 1 or 2 courses with us. So that's the lens I bring to this. The things I want to impress upon you are really a handful. One is just that I think when we look back on this period of a month or 2 months or 3 months, goodness knows, I think we're probably going to divide schools into 3 buckets, right? There'll be those that didn't really rise to the occasion in terms of crisis mitigation and shifting to online learning. There'll be those that did successfully manage an online crisis, and then those that leveraged this opportunity to really push their communities forward into what the future of learning could perhaps look like. And I think probably all of us want to get our schools into that 3rd bucket. I would encourage you to think just about a handful of things. And the first is to say that the questions that came in around tools and platforms are urgent, I'm sure, and feel somewhat expedient, but I would suggest that if you're right now thinking about which tool platforms to use, you're probably thinking about the wrong question. Your school likely has some kind of LMS or Google Classroom type setup. Your school perhaps has certain protocols around 3 or 4 other tools that many teachers use. I would urge you to lean into what your community knows and is prepared to use. And instead of looking for new innovative tools to try in this situation, look for the best, most innovative practices with the existing tools. Keep some earth under your kids' feet. Keep some stability in terms of the things they're being asked to use, kids and the teachers, of course. Be reminded that even if every teacher introduces 1 new tool a week, which on the surface sounds pretty reasonable, if a student's taking 6 or 7 classes, there's a good chance they're getting swamped with 6 or 7 new tools a week. And I don't think we would want to put that upon our students. We want their cognitive load as free as possible to the skills and content at hand. I would urge you, when thinking about curriculum in particular, to think about choice and think about offering as much control to students as you can. It looks like I can share my screen now, so we'll
Awesome.
forge ahead. Oh, sorry. So when we're talking about curriculum, here we go. I would encourage you to give up a little bit of, I must cover this, that, and the other thing, and focus instead on what you want every student to take away in terms of thoughts, dispositions, and skills. I've coached a lot of teachers who have come into teach an online course for the first time with what is clearly 25 weeks of content for a 14-week course. And I always tell them, try to turn too much content into just enough choice. You as the teacher don't have to necessarily make the tough choices about what to cut. Set it up in a structure that the student can drive his or her own learning, pursue the things that are most interesting to them, but then don't compromise on the skills you want them to take away. So this seems like an appropriate time to move in that direction, to swing the pendulum a little more towards skills and a little more away from content. And I would say we've all had the face-to-face classroom situation where maybe we have small groups working in different topics or students working on independent projects, and that's a tough thing to manage. It's not nearly as difficult in the online space as it is to do so when you've got 20 adolescents in the room. So think about ways that you can take advantage of the fact that the online learning space is different from the face-to-face setting and use that to empower students more. This is what the biggest thing teachers need to be focused on when shifting from face-to-face setting to the online setting is that assessment needs to be rethought almost completely. If most of your assessment has been tests and quizzes with answers that are relatively concrete, it's going to be imperative that you move to a situation that is more inclined toward task-based assessment. Jay McTighe has a wonderful article on performance task, which I'll tweet out here as we go. Think about assessments that have students pursuing questions, problems that don't have clear answers, but do have clear guidelines for the skills they should build as a part of that. Lean out of objective measures in tests and quizzes and lean into projects. Lean a bit away from summative assessments and more into formative assessments. I would highly recommend Dylan Williams' book, Embedded Formative Assessment. And I would say, think about democratizing the feedback that comes with that environment of formative assessment. Think about ways that you can train your students to give really excellent peer feedback. Think about ways that you can have students learn to really thoughtfully self-assess and reflect on their progress as a part of their assessment ecosystem. All of this is a way of saying you want to get away from seeing if students can answer questions that they could just Google the answers to, and lean into complex processes of exchange between teacher and student as a part of the assessment environment. And so thinking about tools a little bit differently and economizing tools at a systems level, at a school level, thinking about curriculum in a way that perhaps scales back on content and leans more into skills, and that also empowers students to make more choices where that's appropriate. And then thinking about assessment in a way that encourages students to deal with messy problems, deal with ungoogleable questions, I think is going to set you up for a successful time in the online learning world. And I look forward to taking some questions as we get there.
Great. Thanks very much, Jason, for that introduction. And now we're going to ask Scott to introduce himself and talk a little bit about the work that he's doing.
Sure. Thank you, George. Let me just get my screen share up here. Also, yes, going. A little housekeeping here. Here we go. All right. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm, as George said before, my name's Scott Prescott. I'm the I'm a director at Virtual Learning Academy Charter School, which is a public charter school in New Hampshire. And we're available to students throughout the world, but we do primarily deal with New Hampshire students. And prior to that, I was a principal of a brick and mortar school and taught high school math for a number of years. So I'm going to just share with you some of the things that we've learned over the last 12 years that we've been working in terms of what works well and things that you may want to be thinking about. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time enough to go into real depth on any one of the topics, just because each thing that I touch on could be an hour-long webinar in and of itself, really. So let me hop in and just talk through a few things. I'm going to talk about the things in red here: communications, daily structure, instruction, and support and supervision. And I know a few people asked. The intention is to share these slides out later on. I think Allison's going to send them out through email using the list that she got when you registered. So let me talk a little bit about communication, which is a really, really important thing for you to be thinking about right now, in my opinion. First of all, we found that in online learning, and Jason and I talked a little bit about this, and it was funny because independently we came up with the same thing, like what's the one most important thing is, and it's developing strong relationships with your students, and it can be done very effectively in an online environment. It's the thing that we put up first when we hire new people and train them, and it's the last thing we say to them at every meeting, is that's key. And it really does work. A lot of our teachers work in both brick and mortar school and in online learning, and they tell us that they develop just as strong relationships or stronger ones in the online environment as they do in the face-to-face setting. So in terms of communications, you can see I put a number of things up there. One thing that I see happening right now and is typical is that you overwhelm your students and parents with communications, and you overwhelm your staff with communications if you're not careful. As Jason said earlier, when you start thinking about teachers introducing new tools, and if you think about teachers emailing their students and parents, if they're sending out a couple of emails or 3 emails a day, or in the administration sending out some, and you multiply it by the number of people, it just gets out of control pretty quickly. So think of these different types of communications. I said the web page or Google Classroom or whatever you're using, having a centralized place where you post things as opposed to emailing them out so they stay there and people don't have to search back through them. Keep your emails to a minimum. We really work hard on that. Also encourage your folks to think about picking up the phone or in face-to-face meetings. The tendency is once we go online to rely heavily on email, and that really oftentimes is not the most effective way. So the other thing I think you should be thinking about is how you're going to coordinate and be consistent. And I just put the different areas to consider. How about your administration communicating with your staff, and your administration communicating to students and parents, and then the staff communicating to students and parents. And really what we do is we think about and we set some common expectations right up front for communications. And we first of all talk about the time and frequency so we get a grasp on how often people are sending things out and looking at it. If you think about it, when you send out so many different communications, what it becomes is white noise eventually, and then they stop paying attention to it. So you want to do it in a more condensed version in a regular pattern so that it's predictable. Then we also talk about people, and it may seem silly, but we talk about the format of them, because a lot of times, especially in this direct messaging, texting world, we have to remind people that, you know, your emails, and hopefully this is something you've always already addressed with your school, needs to have a consistent format and clarity, that they don't bury a number of items in a long list. They don't send an email out. If you've got a number of things you want them to attend to, you bullet them out. And then what we do is we create an FAQ sheet that compiles all the things that we're talking about so that people can keep referring to it so they don't have to go back and get those questions over and over. So those are some of the things we think about in terms of communication. Structure, organization. This is something else that people struggle with when in a brick and mortar setting, and then when they go into a online setting, they struggle with it again. So hopefully administration's communicating a clear schedule that the school will be following so it's predictable to everybody. And one of the things we find works real well in the online setting is to chunk your time. You're going to see me refer to that a few times in here. For your staff, one thing to consider is the work versus non-work time. If they set real clear timelines, you can see I'm sitting in a little office area, and when I'm not working, I get up and move out of here. And your teachers need to do the same thing. They'll be better instructors if they separate that time. And the danger at home is, of course, you can get on email, you can get on the internet at any time and be communicating, working with people. I'd encourage you to talk to your staff about setting up a work area, and that you talk to them about chunking their time throughout the day, dedicating it to these different areas that I list here. Otherwise, they multitask and they jump from thing to thing, and it makes them very inefficient in terms of their workflow. So they need to consider, when are they going to do the correcting instruction, planning, and if they're offering some kind of open office hours for people to come in, students to come in, parents to come in and get some help. Also talk to your students and parents about the same topic of the structure, because they're going to really struggle with this at home. If they're working, in the room where there's a TV, they're on a computer where they can FaceTime, they can chat with people. You really have to get some information out and get in front of that so that they have a schedule. And I would suggest that you give them a suggested schedule that they follow. Don't leave it up to them to reinvent the wheel and everybody figure that out. Now, if they need to adjust it for some reason, okay, they can, but here's what the schedule we suggest for your son or daughter, your child to follow. And then I put in your movement breaks. Just like in a brick and mortar school, you should be thinking about this. You don't want your students sitting there for 2 hours trying to attend. They need to get up and move around, but plan those. Don't make them arbitrary. At certain points, get up and go outside for a walk, do whatever they need to do to move around. And then again, some kind of a tips or FAQ sheet. I think of this a little bit more as a tip sheet in terms of the way to organize your time for both your students, parents, and your staff. So there'd be different sheets for the student and parents and the staff, but I'd get those out. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about instruction also. There's really, when you go into this world, you're going to hear the word talked about synchronous versus asynchronous a lot. I think a lot of places are going to, and it makes sense to me, do some synchronous and some asynchronous learning. I don't think you can exactly replicate. In my opinion, it would be kind of foolish to try to exactly replicate what we're doing in the brick and mortar school in the online setting, so that everybody runs their class for 45 minutes to an hour or whatever your schedule was, or if you have a block schedule for 2 hours and the kids come in there and the teacher tries to run that class, that would not be a great recommendation. But some of the things in a synchronous environment, use a virtual meeting room like we're using here. Have your teachers turn on the cameras, have them use their microphones. That visual of seeing somebody face to face is very powerful. Use one tool. Jason said this, so I'm not going to harp on it too much, but I am going to mention it because it's so important. Try to minimize the number of tools. I heard of a local school that was letting every teacher pick whatever virtual room they wanted to use. And they were having like 4 or 5 or 6 different virtual rooms. Some were using Skype, some Zoom, some Google. That's not user-friendly. That's not good for your students. They have to learn all these different ones, and they have to download things for certain ones. And so gain some consistency there. Make it easy for students to know how to get into the classrooms. We develop a student center where they can go in, and it's a one-stop hop for everybody, where they can go in and they can find all their teachers' information, and they can they find links to their classrooms and everything like that. So it's a place they send off from. Then think about, if you're going to run something live, the format for it. We do collaborative sessions. They work great online. You can use breakout rooms if you're in Zoom and you have that feature. There's a lot of techniques to use in there. We're running sessions on that for educators in terms of how you can do these kind of things. But also realize that when I put down here in the tips, if you're going to run something online, you need to show up early. You're going to have to troubleshoot. The first class may be almost all troubleshooting, getting the kids working and getting the microphones working or whatever. You're going to have to decide if you're going to have students turn on their cameras. It's not a problem. We make it optional for our students. Once they turn it on, they love it. They like the visual. Headphones are really helpful. A lot of people are like, oh, I can hear just fine. Well, it's picking up a lot of background noise. So if you're going to have a lot of people in there, having everybody have headphones, and they all have them. You look at me, I have these, George has something on, most anything plugs in, and it is helpful. And they don't realize as a person running it, how helpful it is to the people listening. But as you teach, encourage your teachers to think about short segments. It's a good practice anyways, right? We can only attend for so long. You do something for 5 or 10 minutes and then you change over and have the students practice it or do something, break it up. It shouldn't be too long. Otherwise they're gonna drift off. They're on a computer. And then you're also gonna run into, depending on your tools, some bandwidth issues. Some just quick fixes. If you're having bandwidth issues, freeze your camera. That helps. That's the biggest thing to do. Also, try to minimize the number of applications they have running on their computer at any time, because that can really be a problem. And then I put some tips for asynchronous, thinking about, either in a day snapshot or a week snapshot, getting your information in one place that students can find it and access it. It's a good model. You can set out a week's calendar. This is what you should be doing this week. And you can put in, I'm going to have meetings on these couple of days or these 3 days where you come in for something live. Here's what you should be working on the other days. Your teachers can come into something like Zoom and record a lesson, and it's easy to download and they can put it up there. So they don't have to use all videos. And it's very, most any meeting software has that capability also. And then just lastly, support and supervision. I wouldn't lose sight of this, and I really would put the emphasis on the support right now. That's what you're trying to do for folks. There are a lot of things. I was surprised when I came into the online world. I quite frankly think I do a much better job of supporting and supervising people now in the online world than I did in a brick and mortar setting. Why? Because I can see so much more in a way that's going on. So I can tell when they're having struggles, and I can pinpoint where they are and what supports they need. Whereas in the brick and mortar classroom, I couldn't always tell that. So here's some things that I would just suggest you think about. Set and monitoring expectations. That's tools, sorry. As Jason said, be clear about what tools you use. Use the ones you're already using. Don't introduce a whole bunch. It's almost going to be viral. They're going to be like, hey, I saw this great tool. Everybody should try it. They're going to put it in chat, and we say, no. Everything has to go through us. And it sounds like we're micromanaging, but we make them run any tool they're going to use through us so that we can kind of keep a tab on that. Virtual meeting rooms, just the expectations for how they do that. Teachers turn on their cameras, have microphones, things I talked about before. We have grading timelines and email response timelines. This is what we expect. We expect emails to be responded to in 24 hours, grading to be done in 48 hours. We're clear with everybody. And then that saves a lot of confusion on the back end for everybody. And then etiquette, communicating that to everybody, including your parents and students, especially students. They won't get it. And then identify supports where they're available. And I just listed a variety of things that you may be thinking about, that they may need some support. So these would be people in your school, administrators, when can they come in and get help with these different things, and then develop an FAQs on this. Those are some of the things that I would be thinking about. I put some things in an assessment. Jason already talked about that, so I'm not going to say anything more than up at the top. I think this is a great opportunity for folks. And as he said, they're going to fit into different buckets. Some people are going to learn a lot about assessment during this time, because you can do very high quality assessment in an online environment. And one of the things we use at the bottom is we do oral assessments at the end of each concept that they cover, a competency, we call it, their standard. And they get together for a short meeting with their teacher and they talk with them. It's a great one-on-one session. We give them the prompts ahead of time, and it's a great form of assessment, and it's doable. Our teachers, our full-time teachers, have 140 students. They do it with each one at the end of each competency they cover. I have some tips in here. We're going to share these. You can take a look at it. I also put in here, if you're interested, at our website is vlax.org, and you can do /educators. These are sessions that we're running for free right now for online folks, or anybody around wherever. You can see the titles. You can go in, look at them, sign up for them. You're welcome to come to them. We're happy to have folks. And that's it. Just want to thank you. And if you need anything, let me know.
Great, Scott. Thanks a lot. That's really helpful. I know that during the webinar so far, there have been some really good questions that have come up. And so we're going to kind of go off script a little bit here. And Allison's going to pose a couple of questions that she's gotten off the Q&A.
Thanks, George. I think that Jason has been answering some of these questions directly to the participants. But Jason, if you could just talk a little bit more about assessment. There were some questions when you talked about creating an ungoogleable assessment, sort of what that means. And if it's ungoogleable, then what resources will they be using to find the answers? And just, you know, let's just talk a little bit more about that. Assessment was the topic that came up the most, I think, in the questions that we received from the attendees. And I think you know, that would be great if we could just explore that a little bit.
Yeah. I guess what I mean by that isn't that the students shouldn't use the internet to find information, but rather the answer shouldn't be obviously apparent with a 5-minute search, right? So if we are thinking of a traditional test or quiz one might give in a classroom where we've artificially restricted the information students have access to, and we've asked them some identification questions on a historical period, or we've asked some multiple choice questions, those are all very Googleable. A student, if they don't know it, if they weren't in your classroom there without their computer, they would just look it up and find the answer. And what I'm suggesting is that kind of assessment isn't going to fly in the online space. What you need to do is jump directly to that essay question, right? Jump directly to that compare and contrast where they're not going to find a ready solution to the problems. They're going to have to search for several different articles and sources and decide which sources are credible and read them critically and compare them. And then you're going to use a rubric, I would presume, to do this. We run a competency-based program. It sounds like Scott is involved in a lot of the same work where teachers have to be clear at the onset of the course. And if they haven't done so at the onset of the course, they can give it a shot at the onset of the unit now as they go into what are the 5 skills we're going to build here. And those 5 skills are the things you're looking for when you see the student work, whether it's formative work or a larger assessment.
Great, thank you. So there were also a couple questions about sort of privacy issues and speaking with students online, and sort of just, you know, is that an issue in terms of their own privacy? I don't know if Scott or Jason, either of you have any thoughts about that?
I'll take a stab at that, and then I'll post a link in the chat here to a blog post a colleague of mine just put out. This is something teachers, I think, have a lot of apprehension about. Students have a lot of apprehension about. We give guidance to teachers that they should follow the same kinds of protocols that they have at their school around private conversations with students. I know there are lots of schools where the suggestion is made you don't have individual closed door conversations with students. You leave the door open, or the conversation's always in front of the window, or something like that. We encourage our teachers, when that's the policy at their school, to find a quiet place, but not a totally private place, right? Where ostensibly there are others who could be hearing. Likewise, for students, we encourage students and teachers to dress the way they would dress if they were coming to class, to not be sitting in their beds whenever possible. Things like that one would think should go without saying, but they're worth saying nonetheless. And I've heard a few things around teachers recording everything and schools recording everything. That to me seems like overkill. Goodness knows we don't record every interaction between teachers and students. in the face-to-face environment, and so that's not a direction we've gone. We've got a couple thousand students, and for 10 years, and have handbooks and protocols and guidelines around this stuff, and it has not, knock on wood, been a problem thus far. Very, very few and far between are situations where we've had a student say or do something. In 0 cases where we've had a teacher say or do something that we wouldn't want them to.
Okay.
Before Allison asks the next question, I just want to comment on some of the chat that I'm seeing, specifically about advice for working with younger students and advice for working with students with special needs. And I just want all of our attendees to know that, those are very big topics, and we appreciate how interested people are in them. We are planning to have additional forums in the future that focus specifically on those areas. So our hope is that next week our forum will include some additional resources and some expertise regarding younger students, and that at a time in the future, we will be addressing the issue of supporting students with special needs.
Yeah, I saw those as well, George. And I wondered, younger students we had talked about that we would do in a different form. I wondered if there was any quick advice that Jason or Scott had regarding the special needs question, because that has come up multiple times. And also equity in terms of home environments. Some, we know that some students have computers, some don't. Is there anything brief that you guys want to share about that, just because it's come up so much?
Well, it's a big question, and it can even vary. I know in New Hampshire, what we've all done is look to our DOE, the Department of Education, for some guidance in terms of what is okay and not okay, in terms of meeting for special students with special needs in an online environment. What kind of meetings can you do? And they actually had their attorney go out and have a very clear ruling in terms of what you can and can't do, because I think you have to be real careful, as George was saying, and make sure that you're following the law, and folks need to interpret that. And then a little bit what you're talking about in terms of, and I know you're going to do this in a different session, but yes, doing K through 6 is different than doing grades 6 through 12 or whatever. You have to have a different approach. You need to involve the parents a lot more. You can still do some very interactive stuff. You can, I know some teachers that are getting together with their students a couple times a day, and so they have some work to do in between each meeting. Parents are coming. You need to expect parents to be there. If you have some kind of off hours, the parents are going to be a big support. But it's its own session.
I just add a couple of things on that, and with the caveat that our experience, we don't offer special education programs, but we do certainly serve students with all kinds of different individualized learning plans. But I think one thing to be aware of is the fact that there are ways in which the online setting can actually be really beneficial to students with certain learning differences, right? The emphasis on asynchronicity, for example, in many settings, allows for students who might be extended time students, might be students with processing differences, to sit and think and digest and participate on the same footing as your most gregarious, quick on his feet participant in the discussion. That's something we've heard over and over again. I remember one particular course where we had a student who was on the autism spectrum and frequently participated in asynchronous video discussions, where students would record a 1-minute contribution to the discussion and post it, and would say with great emotion how much she valued being able to do that asynchronously, because it allowed her to watch and rewatch and think about her classmates' positions and not have to react emotionally in time to a human face, so to speak.
One thing, so someone just asked about care and constructive feedback to students. And I know, Scott, in our conversation yesterday, you talked a lot about relationships and the importance of building relationships. Do you want to just talk for a minute about how that happens in the virtual space? And there's also some questions about sort of counseling and those kinds of things, which is a different topic, but in terms of sort of meeting students' emotional needs at this difficult time.
Sure. What we end up doing, what we find in the online environment is you don't have the quantity of face time that you have in a regular brick and mortar setting, but you have a much higher quality of face time when you're in the online setting. Our teachers do have office hours on a regular basis that students can drop in on and get one-on-one help. They can actually set up meeting times if they want to, that are separate from the office hours, so they know that they're the only person meeting with the student. And we also engage with the parents so that we get to know the parents in our interactions. So when we're having one-on-one meetings, oftentimes our teachers will be coached, you know, hey, your mom and dad there, depending on the age too. You know, can I say hi and check in and make sure things are going okay with them? And then as we do these, we always close, you know, is there anything else I can do to help you be successful, to help you be, and typically 90% of those, or high 90% of those, they say, no, I'm all set. But the fact that you're asking that, you're having one-on-one interactions, it really builds a really strong relationship quickly. And I think there's also something about kind of letting them into your house like you are mine right now, that helps with that. You do want to, I'll just put as a caveat, you didn't say this, you always want to check your background too. And you want to have a place where you can either shut your door. It's cute when the little kid walks in or the dog comes in once or twice, but not everybody thinks it's cute. And you got to play that a little bit by ear.
All right, George has a couple questions for you before we wrap up.
Yes, I wanted to touch on the issue of curriculum. We had a question that was proposed to us about, you know, do you try to replicate your brick and mortar curriculum in the virtual space, or do you adjust your curriculum in some ways so that it's better adapted to the online space? And I wondered if Jason, maybe we can start with you, and if you have any thoughts about that, and Scott, you could chime in as well.
Yeah, my response to that would be certainly to adjust it, and I would adjust it in a way, and I have no sense of, you know, what the person who posed the question teaches, but if I'm imagining a content-heavy course, say a U.S. history course, AP U.S. history, I might be thinking about ways that I can create choice for students among the content, that I can let students navigate a little bit more. Some students might be able to accelerate, and some students might need more time on particular topics. That's the beauty of the online space, is that students can make choices more readily. You're not dealing with 20 students in the same space at the same time, and you can deal with them more as individuals, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with Jason. When you say, I would say that you focus your curriculum more, that you go to that depth over breadth model. And this is one of the things where I said, I think there's some good things that can come out of this in the end, in terms of our work with students. I would say, hopefully, if your curriculum, we're a competency-based curriculum, we really try to narrow it down to what are those things, those enduring understandings that we want the students to walk away with, and we will make sure that they walk away with those. I don't think you need to let go of those, but I think what some people are going to have to do is to refine, like Jason was saying, the massive quantity of stuff that they may be asking the student to do, and have them dive in a little bit more deeply. We get some great feedback from students in terms of doing that. We do a lot of project-based learning. We do a lot of student developed learning too. And, you know, they come back and say, I remember it better. It stuck with me because I had some ownership of it. So I wouldn't say, you shouldn't be in a problem when you get to next fall. You should have covered everything in your curriculum that is critical for them to be successful with their next step in learning. But if you look critically at your curriculum, there's probably a lot of stuff you could let go that they can still meet those needs. So that would be
Yeah. One thing we hear from teachers who've been working with us for a number of years, but our hiring model is that a teacher teaches one course for us and then teaches full-time at their school. And one thing we hear from them over and over and over again is the degree to which you have to be intentional in the online setting. You have to script what's going to happen. You have to choreograph what the learning experiences are going to be. You have to broadcast what the skills students should be building in each activity are. The degree to which you have to do that in the online space totally changes the way you interact with your face-to-face classroom. Once you start saying to yourself, okay, what are the enduring understandings that students must have at the end of this course? What are the competencies they must have? Those become your non-negotiables. And whether this, that, or the other content unit supports that is a decision you make or decide to include or exclude.
So one question that we're getting a lot, and I know this has been touched on already to some degree, but people are really interested in what kinds of technology tools are being used. And I know you gave great advice that you should really try to minimize them and keep them consistent across classes. But maybe each of you could talk a little bit about some of the tools that you're seeing being used and some of the more successful ways that they're being used.
Sure, I can tell you what we've gravitated towards and seeing some schools gravitate towards some kind of virtual meeting software, obviously, like we're in now. We use Zoom. I've been in the online environment for about 12 years now, and we probably use 6 different online learning virtual meeting tools. And this is this is the longest we've had anyone with Zoom. Because it just seems to eliminate a lot of the issues that we had with others in terms of bandwidth. It has breakout rooms, which are really powerful for us, and it's pretty intuitive. And they designed it well. So that's one of the pieces. Of course, we're seeing Google Classrooms used all over the place. I think that's because schools had that in place. It's a great tool. And I would recommend using something like that. Other pieces, as I said, we're pretty careful about the tools that we allow people to use. We don't allow them. We use the whole Google suite, so we use Google Docs and such, and Gmails, and we find that is nice because they integrate well with everything. They integrate well with LMSs. Students can submit directly links to those, and you can have a much better collaboration between the teacher and the students, or student to student, in terms of comments and features in there. So those are the ones that we hit.
Yeah, I would echo the 3 that have been said. You have to have an LMS of some kind, and if you don't, next time around you will, I think. A video conferencing software that everybody's comfortable with, like Zoom, for example. We also use Zoom and have found it to be fantastic. And what was the third one I was the things that haven't been mentioned that I would encourage, Google Suite is sort of like the oxygen we breathe. But the ones that haven't been mentioned that I would say are worth exploring, and they're things that we ask all of our teachers to set up as a part of their course setup for their online course, is some kind of a booking link. We use Calendly, CALENDLY. We have at times used youcanbook.me, which essentially creates a link that students can visit and see when their teacher is available to meet and schedule a meeting without the 2 exchanging 6 or 7 emails to find a free time. We have every teacher do that and put that link on the homepage to their course, and find that it facilitates communication, because really it's about human communication, not about the tool. And the other is also about human communication. We use a messaging app. With our faculty, we use Slack. We have a Slack team that allows us to manage the faculty, I think, in a really fluid way, and create a lot of community among our faculty, despite the fact that they're all around the world. And we used to use Slack with students, and they said, this is a game changer. This totally makes this a really human experience. And then Slack went to being 16 and older, and so we started using an app called Twist, which is ostensibly the same thing, the same concept. It's this fluid back and forth, sort of like a Facebook Messenger type setup that's private to the class. It's called Twist, and that allows younger users. So those are 2 pretty powerful things. Like I said, I would emphasize, don't go introducing 1,000,001 new tools to your students and to your staff, but those are 2 that we've found facilitate really human communication, that we ask all of our teachers to use and set up the beginning.
Can I just jump back in, George, on that? Because I think, Jason, we use Slack also, which is a really powerful tool because you can also set up groups in it so that people, you don't have to send messages back and forth. We've almost eliminated email in our organization internally using Slack because it just works much better than that. And the other thing I was going to say is, I don't know everybody out there, when Jason says LMS, he's talking about a learning management system, such as Canvas, Moodle, Blackboard, those types of things. One thing I would not recommend is if you don't have one in place, going out and trying to introduce one right now, because that will be a disaster. But it is something good to get in place. One thing I've seen a lot of schools, and one thing I think some people are going to learn through this is the importance of consistency throughout your school in terms of their usage of things. Where different teachers had web pages, some used, maybe they had Canvas in their school, and some used that, and some used some other tool and stuff. It really is, I said this before, it's not user-friendly, it's not helpful to the student. And one thing coming out of this, people are going to learn is, wow, we really need to have some consistency in terms of some of this stuff so that we can deal with situations, unpredictable situations.
I think
one of the comments that was made yesterday in our preparation meeting was for schools who are new to the virtual learning space and what specific tools they might use. And I think it was one of you said that they should use the tools that they're already using. They shouldn't try to implement new tools now because it's just such a steep learning curve.
There was another question, I know we're going to wrap up. We're trying to keep it to an hour, but questions a little bit more about synchronous and asynchronous and sort of a child's day in school. So there was some comments about that some students maybe are feeling overloaded with the amount of work. So I guess maybe just one last question from me from the chat about sort of how do you determine what a student's day should look like? Should it look exactly like it does in their regular school, or should there be some flexibility in terms of them being able to figure out when they do the work that they've been assigned?
I would say certainly it varies by age range. I mean, as a father of elementary school age kids, I do not want my children on the screen all day long, and nor would I want my high school kids on the screen all day long. I would really discourage schools from thinking that students aren't in class and aren't productively engaged in learning unless they are synchronously present with their teacher and classmates. I just think that's layering, that's just putting the face-to-face setting in a digital setting, and it's not taking advantage of the strengths that the digital setting has. I would encourage, if you want to keep a similar kind of bell schedule for the sake of consistency, I would say maybe get the kids on Zoom for 10 minutes and lay out what the activities are you want them engaging with for a period of time and reconvene with them. Think more creatively than putting 20 students in a setting like this for 60 minutes, because I think you'll find most of them are probably on a social networking site after about the first half hour because it's not the right way to do it. I know when I've had an afternoon when I've got 4 or 5 hours of back-to-back-to-back meetings, it doesn't feel like something contributing to my wellness.
Yeah, I would agree with Jason. One of the things that he did kind of say in there, and I do agree with that. I think you need to provide a schedule though for your students and parents, and otherwise you can't. Asynchronous doesn't just mean wherever, whenever. That we find a lot of students come in. That's what we spend a majority of our time with students in the first couple weeks, 3 weeks of their online learning experience, is teaching them how to work in this environment and how to structure themselves. So I think the more you can be clear about that, but as he said, I totally agree. You got to break it up. You don't want them sitting there. That doesn't mean, since they're not in synchronous meetings like this, that they're not doing work. As he said, you can set up the hour-long period in a 10-minute piece. You can have them come back in and check in at the last 10 minutes of that time to come back in and check in with you, or the teacher could have the office open so students could pop in and get some one-on-one help if they needed to. That they just need to think about how to structure that, and it's also helpful if you don't have, if you have 100 teachers, that you don't have 100 of them figuring it out, that you give your teachers the model that they can work off of. Here's 3 models that you can run a classroom off of. take your pick based on which is most appropriate for what you're doing that day. And then that's helpful. Everybody, the students are used to that. They get the phone. Oh, I did this over in, Mr. Cummings' class. Yeah, I'm familiar with how to do this. Oh, I did this in Mr. Edwards' class. So that's really helpful.
Awesome, thank you.
So our time is almost over, and one of the questions that we got asked a few times is, and I know this requires a crystal ball, but if you can dust off your crystal ball and think to the future, what are some of the things that you think are going to be maintained once our brick and mortar schools reopen from this virtual learning experience? Or conversely, what are some of the things that you would like to see maintained?
You want to go first, Jason, or no? I think we said some of them already. One of the things that I hope will happen out of this is that we will take a look at our curriculum and what are those really key enduring understandings that we want the students to master in each course experience. And because I think that if folks have that in place, they're going to have a much easier time right now. As Jason said, also, I think schools will look at their technology tools through a little bit different lens. So if you have to, we live in the Northeast, on a snow day, they're really, if they give some thought to it, they could pull it off pretty easily if they have thought through this. But you need to have a robust, as he said, LMS that everybody's using. You need to have some kind of online meeting tools, some of those. And then I think the other thing that I think folks will come out with is the clarity of expectations as a school for everybody involved. In terms of, how do you communicate? How do you, how do you assess? I think that's the other piece. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little around here, but the assessment that Jason talked about, I think that's the other thing that could be huge coming out of this, because I really think there's no reason you can't do I know you can do as quality job assessing in an online environment as you can in a brick and mortar setting. But and I think there's a lot of carryover that our instructors tell us they carry over into their classrooms. Jason?
I will point to two things. One would be, I think, a misplaced misperception that online learning or blended learning is a priori less than an in-person experience. I think some of your teachers are going to do some of the most amazing, creative, innovative, thoughtful work of their careers in this period. And the question is, how do you leverage that and validate that and use that to really enrich the experience at your schools? And the second thing I would say is, how many conversations among faculty and administration are driven around challenges having to do with time, scheduling, and place. Those key resources in the way they're allocated, I think all too often in our schools have been, I've thought of those things as static. If you can think about the way you run your schedule differently because 10 classes are blended and only meet in physical space twice a week rather than 5 times a week. If you can think about a class period differently, then you can solve some problems that have seemed pretty intractable and really redefine some of the way school happens. And so I would challenge everyone here to, again, use this crisis as an opportunity to really jump off and move some exciting things forward.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap it up for us. We want to thank you all so much for joining us today. This has been such an amazing experience to see educators from all over the world coming together, talking to one another, sharing resources, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in the weeks to come. We certainly want to thank our guests, Scott Prescott and Jason Cummings, for contributing their time and expertise. We will make sure that we get all of the links that they mentioned and the resources they mentioned, and we will be sending out a follow-up email with information on how to access this webinar as well as the links and information. So our next Global Virtual Forum will be held next Tuesday, April 7th, same time, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 2 p.m. London, 5 p.m. Dubai, 9 p.m. in Shanghai, China. Our topic will be continuing on some of the topics that we've talked about today, but specifically trying to address that idea of teaching younger learners as well as sustaining virtual learning. So after we've been doing it for a while, where do we go from there? We're hoping to get some of our international colleagues as panelists, but we'll be announcing that within the next couple of days. And we'll be sending out information for you and a registration link so that you can sign up for that webinar. Again, we want to thank you so much for being with us today. George has put up on the screen some resources. There's the information for the VLACs, the Global Online Academy. Also on our NEASC website, we have some resources for schools dealing with COVID-19, and you're welcome to look at that. Also, we just want to encourage you and invite you to email your NEASC staff, NEASC liaisons, and either of the 3 commissions as you have questions or as there are things that you're wondering about. There were specific questions related to IB and those types of things. Please email us. We'll try to connect you with the resources that you need. Again, we just want to emphasize that we're here for you and that we support you and that we're so proud of all the work that you're doing across the world. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday.